Thank you so much for taking the time. The show means a lot to me. I've seen it all the way through at least twice. My husband is now watching it. He's very politically minded. He just read a book about gay sort of cruising spots through Washington D.C. and how they're different through each administration. So,
but that's in itself is fascinating.
It's crazy.
Did he tell you about the chicken hut? Is he relaying information?
He sort of when we saw the cozy corner, he was like, he was just like, oh, this is based on, and he had the book, and he's like, it's based on this. It's really sort of crazy.
But what I love about also queer culture is that it's always reference to sort of quite mundane things, like the chicken hut, which is referenced all the way through fellow travellers, particularly in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Also referred to that because it was previously a chicken restaurant and it just had a chicken on top.
That's crazy.
You can't, beggars can't be choosers.
No, the gays will find it wherever they need to. That's
and we'll be plucking away.
Oh God. There is a goodness in Tim that I actually wrote down on a random no, now I can't find it. There's something about the value of decency and goodness. And I guess I wanted to know, in a sort of general sense, I don't want to say, like, do you think his naivety, especially towards the beginning of the show when we first meet him, I don't say is that difficult to play, but I mean, like, is it harder to tap into that and not make him so, say, loosey-goosey, sort of rose-colored glasses? Do you know what I mean? Like,
I do know what you mean. I think his naivety is about his lack of understanding and education, his own identity, and he comes from a world, especially compared to Hawke and the people that surround Hawke. He comes from less money. Clearly, it's from a very conservative Catholic family.
Yeah.
And so, to me, his naivety was very easy to understand. And in answer to your question, I read it as painful. It's painful for him. It's like he wears his heart on his sleeve. What he's learned through his faith, and presumably from an incredibly loving family and a big extended family, which he talks about and he adores them, is the ability to feel love and esteem and security. And then he's on his own sort of quest to understand himself sexually and with Hawke, and he's suddenly in this incredibly dangerous situation where everything he's learned from his faith, which is to be strong and bold and kind and to listen, it suddenly puts him in extreme danger. And he's met someone who's doing the absolute opposite in terms of how to survive. And so his naivety to me felt like what I hadn't seen, or the opportunity that I felt was that he is edgy, and it's frustrating and grating that he can't understand, and that's what drives him through 3 decades of extraordinary evolution. It's a huge character arc, and I think the naivety had to be driven by a need for understanding and for a better situation for him, but the people around him. I just think he doesn't understand a lot of it, and I think that's incredibly endearing and brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, and that has to be, I don't know, there's something so, I'm not a religious person, but I can imagine being so conflicted that there has to be so much that he doesn't even articulate about frustrations, about the conflict within himself. And actually, I kind of did want to ask about his, I wrote down Tim's eventual and righteous anger, just because I feel that, like, I think we see it more towards when we're in the 80s, when he hurls something back at Hawke. Like, I think, remember when Hawke is leaving and you're saying, like, well, the bathhouses are closed, but I'm sure you can find a bathroom or something like that. And there's something about this, like, mountainous anger that is within him, obviously due to his circumstances, due to the disease that he's dealing with, that I feel like has to be rooted in that conflict with himself and his religion that he's lived with his entire life.
Yeah, I think his hard it's sort of like software and hardware. His hardware is he's loved by a mother and a father and a God, which teaches him that he can be, if he adheres to the certain set of rules, and if he loves fiercely and openly, and if he prays and if he stays focused to them and serves them, he will be okay, and they will love him unconditionally. And yet he knows something about himself which completely undermines that. So from his makeup is based on an extreme duality of value and how he feels safe. And I think that's why Ethan Hawke is drawn to probably, he becomes his God in a way, and it's something he never loses his faith, actually. And so what the beauty of religion, I think, is that it gives you an understanding of something to commit to and to believe in, which allows you then, I think, to move on and to fall in love with people and movements and political ideas. And, the thing with him is that he's always trying to fill that hole.
Yeah. I don't know what you mean. Well, I mean, you have that.
It's always,
I know exactly what you mean. No, I even wrote down the line where you said, I spent most of my life waiting for God to love me. Like, that is so, that's a tremendously sad thing, but the way that you say it is so, that you've accepted it almost, and the way you say it to him.
And I think I think Tim's journey is about acceptance. Sure. And accepting the world he lives in, but mainly is also, he is the same person throughout. That's what I felt in his spirit, is that he, the world is a better place because of people like Tim.
Yes.
And he fights the status quo, and what he feels emotionally, he's led by. So he might not get it right, and he might incredibly expose himself to, to a system which could literally kick him out of his job. He could lose his house. He could live. His whole livelihood is at stake. But he's led by emotion. And I think that's what's so beautiful about the dance and the balance between him and Hawke. And Hawke has managed to take emotion completely out of it.
Yeah,
it's worked out how to. But there is no right and wrong, and there is. I think it's about queer existence. I think that's what Fellow Travellers does so well, and especially with Jelani and Noah's storyline, the Frankie and Marcus storyline, which deals with blackness and queerness, and about which I found so fascinating to just understand more from how detailed their performances were and the conversations around it. But like you are dealt with who you are in this world and how the world sees you, puts pressure on then the decisions and the way you survive. And I think Hawke and Tim, and much like anyone in this day and age now, you can still be politically fervent and front-footed and still be in the closet,
Yeah.
And you can't judge people necessarily. And it's just it's a beautiful nuance. And I think that's why Fellow Travellers to me was always something that I just was an incredible exploration of those two decisions that are made early on, which are based on where you come from, what privilege you have, what you're exposed to, what education you've had, and then how that dances over 40 years. I also just loved that Tim just appears in so many different guises, and he's just not willing to stop fighting.
One of my favorite moments actually is when the scene where we see you stealing the draft cards, and you are you have the collar on and everything. And I think the thing that I love about that scene is after everyone leaves and there's a woman there just like, oh my God, what are you doing? And you say, thank you. And then you close the doors. There's something about that. It was like, even committing a crime, he's very courteous. And I don't know, there's something about that I find very endearing.
Yeah, I think when it comes to committing crimes, he's very mindful.
Yeah.
I think we really have considered that.
Yeah.
But that's also where it's an amazing thing to play a character that's constantly grinding against two very extreme opposing forces. And he really, to me, feels like the magnesium flame version of Shane, because it's just it's triggered so much. And there's actually things that weren't included in the story. A beautiful scene where he talks and quotes Auden to Marcus, and he says, "What's that? What's the poem? Wouldn't it be beautiful now if I just said the poem?"
Just start monologuing. That'd be great. Like the last time. Yeah,
but it's about, if we as stars were to return, two stars. It's basically talking about the stars burning for each other. And he said, if I had to be one of those stars, let the more loving one be me. As in, it's easier to be the one that loves harder than the one that doesn't. And that's something that Ron Maiswainer, who is the hero amongst everyone, we talked about that a lot. And that was a beautiful moment. Even though it wasn't included in the story, there was also this very extreme sort of sequence where we literally saw Tim with a garment, a horse undergarment that he left over his flat, presumably after the first few times he didn't put the radio over, and their sexual relationship was well and truly underway. And he had the garment, and he had his crucifix, and he was praying whilst, and was fighting the erotic need to sort of masturbate whilst being, and it was a really extreme. He started, self-flagellating. And actually, it's interesting because that wasn't included in the overall story, but it was just really helpful to understand that that's probably the extremes. Because it also that appears in the micro shifts in the arguments that him and Hawkins have.
Yeah.
So in the moments of pure sort of bliss, where there is a safety and security that they both find in each other, that makes it worth fighting for both.
I mean, in terms of like complexity and things, like a scene that I always think about is Tim going to McCarthy's funeral, and you barely have any lines in that scene, but there's something about you're surrounded by people, like to the point where people are like knocking you around, and then when you are confronted by one of Hawk's former secretaries, there's something about.
She's brilliant, that actress.
Oh my God, she's so. Some of the really extreme moments where people say stuff, especially to Tim, that I keep thinking of about how he takes that in and how he internalizes it. Like there's another one where Gene Carr says to you, "Let them die. That's how we win." Like that is horrifying. You're just talking about faith, and that is a horrifying thing to do.
That's the constant stream of and aggression. It's not microaggressions. And that if you were a parent and you're aware your child had that relentless narrative put on them all the time, you'd do everything you could to protect them. And if you saw an animal that was being baited like that, you would be like, and yet these gay men and women, and that's why it's obviously so brilliant. But you to tell the story, and step away 50 years, you go back in time, but this is happening right now, in many places in the world, and also the imminent threat of what might happen in America in the rest of the year. But so he does. It is all about internalizing it, and then the absolution that I think he comes to, which is so brilliant. He does not. He is a character who is relentlessly dealing, with waves of torment and hurt, and yet, the inner light that he has, never wanes. And actually, he is unlike Hawkins, who's also experiencing, the same obstacles. Really, Tim, because he's honest and true to himself, he finds a family, a chosen family, and he moves. I think that scene where in Fire Island, where they talk about where they're at, and he's saying, now dating a poet, and he's come out to his mother. I mean, it's just amazing to think about what that would have cost and meant for him to do that.
Yeah.
And he's moved with Frankie and Marcus, and they stick together.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about the relationship between Tim and Lucy, just because you don't have a lot of scenes together, but I feel like I think there's one where you're on the phone, one where there's like you see each other, but then the hospital scene, I love that scene so much. There's something about I spoke with Allison about this scene because I almost spoke to her about that scene entirely throughout the whole interview, but there's something about the way that in a lesser script or a lesser show, Tim would villainize her or hate her. That's not who he is. And there's something about the way that you refer to her as Mrs. Fuller in that hospital scene where you're showing her respect. I just haven't seen a relationship like that. I don't think ever really played out, and I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about maybe his respect for her, since she is Hawk's wife.
Yeah, I mean, I think he does lead with compassion, and I think Lucy does too. And I think that's probably afforded by the fact they've known that they've been in orbit of Hawk together, and they're bonded through that trauma, really, or that life experience. And also, they're sort of both aware that they both chose to be there. I think it shows also that Tim is accepting of the world that he lives in at that point. And they are both, I think she's so sort of politically aware, and that she's arresting to him in that moment because she cuts through in the same way that there's a similarity to the way that they communicate, actually.
Yeah.
But I think at that point, for her, he's well aware that for her to turn up and come visit the aides wards, it was just a complete terrifying sort of unknown, and that feeling of feeling completely dropped, and for her to come and to sit there and to be emotionally open to him, it was just what I do think is extraordinary about the scene is that it could have gone any which way.
Oh, totally.
There could have been a moment or a word or a comment, and that's what I felt like I think, talked about, or maybe we didn't even talk about it, but it felt to me that was what the scene needed to feel like. And it was just, it just so happened that at that moment he said that, she said that, and that it meant that she could leave. But, he is also, there's a moment where he knows that she's clocked that Hawkins is staying and sleeping in water.
Yeah.
I think it's that weird sort of ownership of love, and I think it's about acceptance, and I think that's why it's a sort of parable in some way. But they've been led on such a merry path, and it's not just by Hawkins. I think that's what's beautiful about the complexity of Matt's performance as well. It's a superb sort of portrayal about it's not just one person; it's a community and a society that creates these dynamics that are just so sort of toxic and scary and painful. And I think they accept that by the end, but and Matt and Hawkins hasn't.
I feel like in a weird way, it feels like Lucy and Tim are almost the recognition that they have for each other is almost like not to this extreme, but almost like war buddies. Like they've gone through sort of similar things, but obviously the circumstances are different for each of them, but they can recognize the similarities between each other.
Also dying, like it's such a It was such, and I remember those scenes. We literally filmed those scenes on World AIDS Day.
Oh my God, really?
Wow. And there was it was just very quiet, and it was in a studio. But I remember, because we hadn't filmed scenes together, that many scenes. I think there's a scene in the '60s, but there was a very sort of it felt like there was a sanctity to them.
Wow.
And we shot that scene really quickly as well, actually, when thinking about it. But those few days were particularly, it's exactly the reason why you'd want to go and play these, tell this story, really, because it's about people who came before, and Tim and Hawkins become sort of like an allegory for the tens of hundreds of thousands of people who, who are not with us now, but and also all the Lucys that aren't with us, and that's I think is so beautiful, and I think there is compassion in Ron's story. Is that, well, two things. One, shame doesn't just affect the person who's being told that who they are is unlovable or unworthy or has no worth. It rots everyone around them because it affects, and I think that's what's so beautiful about the study.
Yeah.
And also for every closeted gay man who couldn't live an honest and truthful life and had to survive, there are a whole family of men and women around him who have, have been decimated because they didn't have their dad, or they didn't have a blueprint for a loving relationship. And that's what's been amazing about Fellow Travellers. It's not just it's the gay community. Of course, it's the story, that explores that and explores race, but it's actually about humanity and the responses that I've had from people who, are Lucy's and are children of Hawke and who are brothers and sisters of Tim's who didn't make it. It's like, that's what it is. It's all really.
That shame can really reverberate outwards, and we have to sort of deal with it individually after the dust settles. We sort of have to come to terms with a lot of things.
I feel like that's probably what, in that instance, is what the opposite of privilege is, isn't it? Is that you've got something that you're born into a fight, basically.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Been finishing my third watch. Thank you so much. I'm super excited for Wicked. So, thank you for your time. Good luck to you this season.
It might be an easier thing to watch more than once.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, and have a good
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.